I declare open this public hearing of the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade References Committee into Australian support for Ukraine. These are public proceedings being streamed live via the Parliament's website, and a Hansard transcript is being produced. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses also have a right to request to be heard in camera. If a witness objects to answering a question, they should state the ground upon which the objection is made, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. I now welcome the co-chair of the Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations, Ms Kateryna Argyrou. For the Hansard record, will you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Thank you, Senator Chandler. My name is Kateryna Argyrou, and I'm the co-chair of the Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations.
Thank you. Before I invite you to make a short opening statement, Ms Argyrou, myself and committee members did want to acknowledge the passing last week of Stefan Romanov, who's obviously had such an important role in advocating for Ukrainians here in Australia. I've met with him previously. I'm sure Senator Fawcett has, and other senators who are committee members, and his passion and steadfastness in advocating on behalf of Ukrainian Australians, particularly since the war broke out, has been so admirable, and I know he will be a great loss for your cause and for the collective cause of achieving peace in Ukraine. But on behalf of the committee, I did want to put my deepest sympathies on the record to you and your organisation, and as well to the Ukrainian community here in Australia, who I know will be missing Stefan very deeply.
Thank you, Senator Chandler. It means a lot to us. Stefan was an absolute titan and giant in our community, and very dear to all of us. So your heartfelt condolences are very much appreciated, and it was a very painful loss for us all. So thank you for expressing that.
Thank you very much. Please start with your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to appear at this public hearing today. The Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations is the voice for the Ukrainian community in Australia. We are the peak body for 22 community organisations across the country with interests across culture, business, youth, religion, and women's issues. We represent the interests of 57,000 strong Ukrainian community in Australia. Since the launch of Russia's full-scale invasion, the AFUO has been working across different levels of government and across the community to support Ukraine and Ukrainians, particularly the 11,400 Ukrainians that are here in Australia today, which have been displaced by Russia's war. I'd first like to acknowledge the deep gratitude across our community for the valuable contributions the Australian government has made to support Ukraine's resistance and, more importantly, survival. Ukrainians will never forget how the Morrison government and the Albanese government stepped up in Ukraine's darkest hour. This gratitude is expressed to me frequently as I talk to anyone from Ukrainian soldiers on the front line through to displaced Ukrainians rebuilding their lives temporarily here in Australia. The enormous breadth of Ukraine's needs, the offensive capabilities for shells, for defensive and protective equipment, for coal, for medevac channels, make coordination, consistency, and strategy absolutely essential. We greatly appreciated Australia's efforts across the humanitarian, military, diplomatic, and legal spheres, and appear to many in our community, Australia's efforts across the humanitarian, military, diplomatic, and legal spheres appear to many in our community to be siloed and sporadic. There is no clear line of sight to Australian support, unlike what we observe from Australia's allies, partners, and friends, including the US, UK, Canada, and Japan. We hear the Australian government wants to empower Ukraine to end Russia's war on its own terms, but that requires scale, action, and political will. Ukraine can only win this fight if it's properly armed and supported. To shift the dial, Australia's contributions, which have become smaller and less frequent over time, must scale up in ambition and become more joined up in execution. While I am no military expert, as a person who had 6 of my family members on the front line in Ukraine, and as a community leader that's currently coordinating the Defend Ukraine appeal, which is the AFUO's fund for non-lethal military aid to Ukraine, I currently have contact with over 50 different brigades across the entire front line in Ukraine. I have a good understanding of the situation on the front line in Ukraine, and I would like to present some examples of missed opportunities that we can explore here. First, armored vehicles. One of the most pressing needs is equipment for promptly evacuating wounded soldiers from the battlefield. There is a critical shortage in armored vehicles such as Bushmasters and Hawkeyes that our community has been advocating for. We deeply appreciate Australia sending 120 Bushmasters. However, as the war has only intensified, no new armored vehicles have been sent to Ukraine for over 1 year. Every single brigade out of the 50 that we have contact with through the Defend Ukraine appeal has a shortage of armored vehicles, a critical shortage for medical evacuation. To address this, we need to fundraise dollar by dollar here in our community to send non-armored vehicles, which are usually second-hand utes that we buy on the second-hand car market. And they are used as medivacs to evacuate wounded soldiers. These vehicles, however, are quickly destroyed and are far more dangerous to be used on the front line. The average life of a second-hand vehicle on the front line that's used for medevac is 15 days. And we all know how long this war has been going on for. Unfortunately, Ukrainian soldiers don't have a choice. This is why the AFUO purchased over 70 off-road vehicles for friends and relatives of our community members. This need could have been addressed much better by the Australian government, sending more Bushmasters or supplying other equipment such as Hawkeyes, Aslavs, M113 vehicles to Ukraine. Using armored vehicles for medical evacuation could have helped save the lives of combat medics as well as soldiers. The second example of a missed opportunity that I would like to highlight here is helicopters. When we first heard about the Australian government decommissioning Taipan helicopters, we began asking our contacts whether medevac helicopters like the Taipan would be useful in Ukraine. Our contacts from over the 50 brigades that we work with presented examples of situations where medevac helicopters were critical. Some of these examples were described in detail in relevant submissions to this inquiry to this committee. What we realized is that no single brigade out of those that we had contact with were helping evacuate soldiers with the help of helicopters. While almost every brigade performs critical life-saving tasks where helicopters could have been incredibly effective. Sending decommissioned Taipans to Ukraine could have been such an easy win for the Albanese government and would have saved thousands of Ukrainian lives. Sadly, a disposal strategy was chosen instead. The third example of a missed opportunity that I would like to highlight and later find a way to move forward is drones. Through the Defend Ukraine appeal, we have raised funds to purchase over 100 reconnaissance drones that are used for surveillance. It took us more than a year to raise enough funds and to purchase these drones that we've sent to Ukraine. They're regular drones that can be bought at JB Hi-Fi. This was only possible because various community groups volunteered their time and energy. To our surprise, we found out that the Australian government recently grounded all DJI drones that were used here in Australia until a review was completed. However, we remain unaware as to whether these drones will be removed from service. Again, thousands of Ukrainian lives could have been saved through providing these and other types of drones to Ukraine. These are just 3 examples of missed opportunities where Ukraine's needs weren't prioritized and unwanted equipment was simply thrown out without even considering sending it to Ukraine. Committee members will be aware from the AFUO submission to this inquiry that the AFUO strongly recommends the adoption of a whole-of-government approach to support for Ukraine, which was first championed by my fellow co-chair, the late Stefan Romanev. By establishing a Ukraine Support Coordination Office within the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, our hope is that such an office would ensure that Australia's support can increasingly be strategic, timely, coordinated, and comprehensive. By appearing not to have a cohesive and well-telegraphed Ukraine strategy which draws together government and non-government initiatives alike, Australia's next move has not been easy to deduce, which has led to uncertainty in our community. While it is heartening to hear government ministers say that Australia stands with Ukraine and will do so for as long as it takes, what our community really wants is to end this war as soon as humanly possible. We do not want a bloody stalemate which consumes our country and countrymen for years to come into the future. In this sense, every contribution Australia makes is a vote for the end of the war. So each one needs to be aligned with what has come before it and how it can meaningfully contribute to Ukraine's victory. This can only be achieved with a considered, proactive, and ambitious strategy that leverages the capacities of the entire government and country. On the 17th of July, our community, along with all Australians, will mark 10 years since the commercial passenger flight MH17 was shot down by Russian-backed separatists over Ukraine. Russia was emboldened by a weak international response to their occupation of Crimea, which set the stage for the deadly and traumatic period Ukraine is now navigating. I'm optimistic for Ukraine's free future, but to get there, I believe Australia must start playing a bigger role, commensurate with our size, stature, and ambitions for the world to help defeat Russia and secure lasting peace. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Senator Fawcett.
Thank you, and thank you for both your advocacy but also your submission and your time here today. You mentioned the call for a office to coordinate this that Stefan put forward. Have you had a response to that?
Thank you for the question, Senator Fawcett. Unfortunately, we have written to government, but unfortunately we have not received any formal response. That is the reason why I make my trips to Canberra, despite the fact that I have a 3-month-old with me. That is why Stefan took time out of his busy schedule and full-time job to come and advocate for that here. Last time we were in Canberra, that was our #1 goal, to deliver this message that Australia really needs a whole-of-government approach to Ukraine. And I will continue to advocate for this on behalf of our community, and I look forward to and hope that we will receive a response soon.
Sure. So I recognise that you've indicated that one of your priority areas is military support, and I wholeheartedly endorse that, and you know that I have advocated very strongly on the Taipan issue, but I'd like to move to something that perhaps indicates the need for a coordinated approach even more urgently locally, and that is you talked about the impact on the people who have fled Ukraine and are here in Australia. Can you just talk to the committee about what are the sort of issues they're facing in terms of uncertainty around their visa conditions as that impacts on education for children, employment opportunities, and just the certainty for them over the next 3 to 5 years?
Thank you. So yes, as a peak body for 22 community organizations here in Australia, we receive lots of ideas, concerns, and community members voice their opinions to us in the hope that we can deliver it to the federal government. Military aid, as you mentioned, is the #1 issue that we hear across all the states, and it's topic #1 in any community meeting. The second topic that is raised and is creating quite a bit of anxiety and fear within our community is how will the humanitarian visa issue be resolved for the displaced Ukrainians that have arrived in Australia seeking shelter as they fled Russian bombs and missiles. Currently, we have 11,400 individuals from Ukraine that are here in some sort of capacity since the launch of the full-scale invasion. Some of those people arrived on a humanitarian visa and have access to different levels of support from the Australian government. That humanitarian visa program was shut down and stopped once there was a change in government. So anyone that arrived after 31st of July was on a different visa stream. So we currently have a situation where we have some members of our community that are on one visa stream, others are on another visa stream. We have family members that are trying to have some sort of family reunification, and they are currently on different paths with different expiry dates, and also, as I mentioned, different levels of support from the Australian government. So what we are trying to advocate on behalf of our community is that because the humanitarian visas that were issued almost 3 years ago are now coming up to expiry, there's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety within our community because our community members don't know what will happen. They don't know if the visa, once it ends, do they have to go back home? Some of them don't have a home to go back to. Others fear of returning to a war zone, which I'm sure you've seen across the news. Russian missiles continue to ruthlessly target civilian cities and civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. So there is this uncertainty in the community, which we are hoping to find a resolution for. And also, I would like to highlight that 70% of the displaced Ukrainians that have arrived in Australia are women and children. So the issues that they are facing are women trying to get employment and employers not wanting to employ them because their visa's coming to an end. We have children that cannot access school education or universities, that people that have where their visa is coming to expiry, they are not eligible for certain scholarships or they're not eligible for certain university programs. So all of that needs to be resolved so our displaced Ukrainians have a level of dignity and a level of certainty in terms of how they can plan their lives going forward.
Order. Senator Forster, I just have to quickly read something in relation to the media, if I could, and then I'll give you back the call. I would like to advise that representatives of the media have clearly requested permission to film and take photographs of the committee's proceedings, and the committee has agreed to this. I remind the media that this permission can be revoked at any time, and the media must follow the direction of Secretariat staff. If a witness objects to being filmed or photographed, the committee will consider this request. The media are reminded that they are not able to take images of senators or witnesses' documents or of the audience, and copies of Senate Resolution 3 concerning the broadcasting of committee proceedings are available from the Secretariat. Senator Fawcett, back to you.
Okay. We have a nod from a gentleman from the media. So,
general agreement.
Here.
Look, thank you. Can I just ask, in terms of getting a focus on resolving issues, and immigration is a good one, I think, where we're dealing with a country where it's not business as usual. It's not as though this is somebody seeking a student visa or a tourist visa from a country that's operating normally. How long have you been seeking feedback or direction from the government to resolve this issue of immigration?
Since day one. We knew that this was going to be an issue when the visas were initially issued because they were for a finite period. So we were trying to get insight into what are the visa pathways after the 3-year expiry. We have been advocating about pathways to permanent residency for the displaced Ukrainians here because they are not, they're not only here. So first of all, there's a small number of them. There's only 11,400. Secondly, these are people that would like to contribute to the Australian economy. They are highly educated. They would like to work, contribute to the Australian economy. They just need to have the pathway to do that. And so as we have had very good contact with Minister Giles's office, the communication lines have been open. He's been very supportive, and we are very appreciative of that. So we as a community feel like we are heard. We just hope that we can overcome some of the bureaucratic issues and find that pathway for people that are currently on different classes, because we don't only have humanitarian visas. Everyone that came after the 31st of July came on a tourist visa and then had to apply for a protection visa. There are different 4 different visa classes that Ukrainians are currently on. So all of that needs to be streamlined somehow, and we're very open to working with government, and we've done surveys within the community. We know the level of education, we know the level of English, we know what obstacles have arisen, whether it's children's schooling, whether whether it's qualification recognition, whether it's different industries that currently lack workers in Australia, for example, nursing, old folks' homes, aged care. Those are some of the skills that our community possesses, and they are very happy to go and fill the gaps in the Australian economy. They just need to have the visa pathway to do it, first of all, but secondly, to get their qualifications recognized. And there's also very high requirements for English level tests. Some cannot reach that high level of English, but if they are working on a construction site or if they're in an industry where such a high level of English is not required, perhaps we can look at ways how to solve those issues as well.
Sure. So coming back to the terms of reference for this inquiry, which is looking at a whole of government approach. Clearly immigration is one area, defence and allocation military equipment is a priority, but there is another actor here which is the private sector. I'm interested to understand what opportunities you've had to engage, for example, with Treasury around deductible gifts, recipient status or tax relief for companies that wish to donate a product. Now that could be body armour, or with the number of casualties that are extant, I'm aware that things like mobile X-ray machines are very valuable, and Microx, a company in my home state of South Australia, is a world leader in small X-ray machines. What discussion has there been with government or with industry about the level of support that would be provided if there were those kind of tax opportunities for a company to gift equipment directly through your organisation or directly to Ukraine?
That is actually a very good question. I can't say that we've had companies approach us saying that they would like to gift equipment or manufactured items, but that is certainly an area that we can explore. Through the community, we have 2 tax-deductible funds. We have the Ukraine Crisis Appeal, which is a partnership with Rotary. We've raised over $10.5 million through that. Immense support from the Australian community. We've recently established Future Ukraine, which is also a tax-deductible structure. We've raised over $5.5 million, again, from Australian corporates, and we have a defence fund that's raised $1.5, close to $2 million for non-lethal military aid for Ukraine. But whereas people have provided donations and received a tax deduction, and it's been used to fund things like shelters for displaced Ukrainians, it's been used to fund ambulances, medical evacuation vehicles, different things that are needed in a humanitarian sense. If we could explore with government, and this is where this whole of government, we can hit the nail on the head there, where whole of government approach would be excellent, because we have many companies that have approached us that said that they want to support Ukraine and help Ukraine, but at this point they only had the ability to make a financial contribution and a financial donation. But if we can explore with Treasury if there could be donations in kind, whether it's medical equipment, there's a company in Queensland that develops skin grafting that has been providing hospitals a lot of support in Ukraine, and I'm sure other things could come from these discussions where we create a mechanism where donations could be made in kind with equipment or manufactured goods. I think it could go much further and provide more aid. So it's
Sure.
definitely an area.
And you were probably correct. Gifting was probably overly optimistic on my side, but at least in kind to still qualify for that tax relief is probably a mode. And I see the chair looking at me. I'll cede there to Senator Shoebridge or Senator Ciccone, whoever. And if we have time, I have more questions.
Thank you. You happy to go to wrap? Yeah. Senator Ciccone, you have the call.
Thanks a lot, Chair, and thanks everyone. I just wanted to ask just a couple of questions around mis and disinformation aspect of our inquiry. Just curious to know what engagement you've had with government to articulate your concerns on this issue.
In terms of misinformation from the Russian Federation?
Correct, yeah.
Well, the Russian propaganda machine is certainly working in overdrive. I think that is a fact. We have engaged with government to identify different things that we saw as a community that was misinformation or completely false information, whether it was on Telegram channels that are either supported or curated by the Russian embassy, the Russian consulate, or supporters of the Russian Federation. We have highlighted items in previous Senate inquiries here. One of them was the inquiry into foreign interference through social media. And we continue to work with the authorities, whether it's local police, federal police, or other agencies, to highlight anytime we see that disinformation being spread widely in Australia. We have called as the community for a very long time to expel the Russian ambassador and to look at the number of agents currently operating for the Russian Federation here in Australia. We have highlighted different cases of misinformation that have been in Australian media, including that was broadcast by the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. So we have tried to be vigilant and have a lot of those examples on public record.
And in terms of your engagement directly with government, have you spoken to or written to or had discussions with anyone in government about the concerns you just outlined?
Yes, we have. We've received responses from a minister from the Australian government in response to one of our latest concerns, which was a documentary that was broadcast on Australian national television showing, as they called, the other side of the war, which tracked and traced a reporter that went to the Russian side of the front line and in our view, completely regurgitated Russian propaganda without proper context given and without any disclaimers or other information saying that that journalist was placed into the Russian armed forces by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, that usually things like that are highly scripted and scrutinized, that nothing would be published without the explicit authority of Russian agencies.
And are there things that the government could do more to address some of this mis and disinformation concerns?
Well, I think that the government should be highly aware that the Russian Federation runs a very sophisticated propaganda program all over the world. I am surprised that the Australian government hasn't addressed the fact that the mouthpiece of a war criminal is currently being represented on Australian territory, considering that Mr. Albanese was calling for the expulsion of the Russian ambassador when he was in opposition during the Morrison government. I'm surprised that the Australian government has not responded to our call to declare Russia a terrorist state, which is what it is. So yes, there are certain steps that the Australian government can take to limit the spread of Russian propaganda and disinformation.
So I know in your submission, you state that while Ukraine is on the agenda through current mechanisms like a senior interdepartmental committee on Ukraine and Secretary's Committee on National Security, we believe that a new approach is needed. The submission then goes on to recommend the establishment of a Ukraine Support Coordination Office. And I know that my question's been brought before, but I just wanted to ask, what would this office do that what I guess the government's not currently doing at the moment, and how would it help, I guess, improve engagement between government to government level discussions?
Well, right now, although the aid that's been supplied by Australia to Ukraine, I will repeat this and will repeat it until the end of my days. We're very grateful for everything that Australia has done, and Australia has supported Ukraine on many levels. Military is just one of them, but humanitarian, medical, we have lots of displaced Ukrainians that call Australia home now and is a safe haven. So Australia has obviously done a lot. And in my recent trip to Ukraine, when I met with various ministers, generals, and representatives of the Ukrainian government, and speaking to soldiers on the front line, it is evident that everyone in Ukraine is also extremely grateful for Australia's support, especially how far Australia is. But the aid that's been provided so far, it's been piecemeal, It hasn't been highly coordinated. It has been in response to community pressure. It's been in response to ministerial visits. It's been in response to announcements that had to be made at a certain point in time. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, there have been a number of missed opportunities. Taipans is just the latest one, and there was a lot of community disappointment, and many members of the Australian community, not just the Ukrainian community, reached out to us in outrage saying that it was a very big missed opportunity and a shame that things weren't done differently and better. So considering that we have a few examples of missed opportunities, the current way that things are working, there's something lacking. So it obviously can be improved, done more efficiently, and that's why we are suggesting this whole of government approach and having a person that we can go to not only for military aid in the Prime Minister and Cabinet's office, but we can discuss things like immigration. We can discuss things about healthcare. We can discuss things about schooling, qualification recognition. We have many different issues that every time we come here to Canberra to advocate, it's never just one thing that we're talking about. We're going between ministers' offices, we're going between, senators, members of parliament, advocating for different issues on behalf of our community members. But if we could just have one point that we can go to and say, look, these are the issues that we have, but we are not a type of community where we just come with problems. We would like to come with solutions as well. And we have an idea of how to resolve the immigration issue with visa pathways. We have an idea of how to resolve the sporadic and uncoordinated approach to military aid, and we would like it to become more systemic. We would like the community to be used more as a resource because we have feedback that we can provide. We can also work as an entity that the government can lean on. Our community has been established for over 70 years in Australia. We have established community structures, centres, physical buildings across all states in Australia. We have established communities and networks. We have a very strong connection to Ukraine where we receive daily feedback in terms of what civilian life is like, what is needed on the front line, how modern warfare is changing. And so we feel that we can contribute by providing that feedback and also offering solutions. We have many members of the private sector that reach out to us. We just discussed with Senator Fawcett about different companies that would like to help. We have high net worth individuals that would like to provide aid. So instead of everyone running off and doing their own thing, if we can coordinate this a lot better, we are currently as a community filling a small gap in terms of supporting displaced Ukrainians and providing some aid to Ukraine. But if we can work together with government, I just think that the solution could be amplified, done in a more cost-effective and timely manner.
Well, I think the government certainly has been working closely with your government, but I take on board maybe some of the processes that could be better streamlined, but I think it's also the nature of governments, not just here in Australia, but around the world, where there are different departments and each of them have their own jurisdictions. But look, I appreciate your answer and happy to hand back the call, Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Ciccone. Senator Shoebridge, you can take us home till 2:45.
Thanks, Chair. And look, again, thanks for your submission and your attendance and the constant work of the Ukrainian community here. I know you speak as a leader of the community, but I know it's a whole of community effort, and I think all of us acknowledge the whole of community effort. Some of this seems like it could be very simple to fix. For example, the government could nominate a senior official in Prime Minister and Cabinet's office to be your go-to person who could then help you navigate and coordinate your work with other government departments. Would that just be a very helpful and straightforward step forward?
Absolutely, that's what we're asking for. If we have one focal point, one go-to person that doesn't... so I understand that the government has many competing priorities. I understand that there are many different departments that have competing priorities and work in different ways. But to your point, if we had that one person that we could go to, that person would be aware of all the issues that Ukraine and the Ukrainian community is currently facing, would be well-versed, and could help us navigate and point us in the right direction of, we have this issue here, this possible solution, this is who you go to, and this is how you can solve it, instead of us running around and trying to advocate individually, individually to different departments.
And just on a very practical point, if you had an idea or a need you could contact that person, arrange for a meeting, and that person could then coordinate and bring the relevant officials or ministers, representatives from other departments, so as you could maximise the efficiency in your engagement with government and also have the right people at the table at the right time. It just seems so obvious, doesn't it?
Yes, that's exactly what we're trying to advocate for, because then not only does it save our time as a community, it streamlines the process, as Senator Ciccone mentioned, but it also allows for strategic thinking, forward planning, which then it doesn't have to be so much of a reactionary response to when the community advocates for something, or when the situation escalates in Ukraine, or if there's some sort of summit that an announcement needs to be made at. This is something that a person would solely be responsible for considering different opportunities for Ukraine. Maybe we wouldn't have the missed Taipan opportunity. Maybe there are other things, for example, on the military side of things, we could have a good line of sight in terms of what type of equipment is being decommissioned, what type of equipment will be phased out, what year, what the process to ask for that type of support and military equipment is. Then we can make sure that the relevant government-to-government entities are speaking and all the paperwork is in place. Right now, all of that seems to be a little bit disjointed, and if we had that one coordinating body, one person, they would be aware of the issues, they would point us in the right direction, they would be able to forward plan, and it would be a better outcome for all.
It would also be a place where your knowledge of what the pressure points are in Ukraine, because you have many connections and communication channels into Ukraine that the Australian government doesn't have, it could be a place where that could be efficiently communicated to government as well, couldn't it?
Yes, and I will give you one example. When we had many meetings, when Stefan and I used to come to Canberra, some were very open to listening to us. Others closed the door and said, we're not going to work with you. We work in different ways. So us as the community, we would like to have a seat at the table so we can voice our ideas and concerns. It doesn't mean that everything has to be accepted and everything has to be actioned.
You're not becoming the government. You're just wanting to be able to talk efficiently to the government.
We would like to be able to channel our feedback and to have our voice heard for government's consideration.
And there are things that you can do with your community that take the pressure off the government. One of the examples that comes to mind is when there was the initial flood of visas being processed, your community was essential in getting the funds out, say, for medical examinations. Do you want to talk us through how that worked? And that's the kind of opportunity you can also bring to the table here.
Yes, thank you for raising that. As I mentioned, we are an established community. We try to do things in a highly coordinated way. The reason why the AFUO, the Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organizations, exists is because we would like to have everything done in a coordinated manner. Mm-hmm. We have peak bodies in every state, and we have regular catch-ups and calls with community leaders. So not only do we know what the pressure points are in each community, we then try to figure out what's the best way to approach it, and that's why our advocacy is usually, you would have seen as senators and members of parliament, our advocacy through the AFUO is usually highly coordinated. When scale invasion initially started and there was an influx of people arriving from Ukraine on tourist visas, and we didn't know how it was going to work, what visa they were going to transition to, and then later it became apparent that there was an opportunity to transition to humanitarian visas. Each and every single person that received a humanitarian visa in Australia from Ukraine had to undergo a BUPA medical check. We saw that with other communities that those fees weren't charged when they arrived here on humanitarian visa status. And so we, as the AFUO, asked if that fee could be waived or reimbursed. The Australian government was very happy to reimburse that because most fees had already been paid, but they didn't have the capacity nor the structure to go and issue refunds for recently arrived displaced Ukrainians. So they said, we are happy to give you the funds if you could administer the refunds, and that's exactly how it happened. So the government was able to lean on our community structures. We had people in place, we had community welcome managers that were able to communicate how this process could work, how to get the documents checked, how to process the actual refunds. We were able to access the private sector to get also additional funds that initially the government supplied funds, but we didn't have enough. We needed more to cover everybody's refunds. So we went to BUPA, the company itself. We went to other high net worth individuals that donated to the Ukraine Crisis Appeal Resettlement Fund. And we had other businesses that donated money to help Ukrainians that were recently displaced by the war, and we used those funds to refund the Bupa medical check fees. And that's just one example of how government was able to lean on us, and we plugged the gap in a quick and efficient way. And I'm sure that in the future there could be other opportunities where we can lean on each other.
Yeah. Could I just quickly then go to the issue about the visas? The initial humanitarian visas were for 3 years. They're in the third year now, a number of those visas, a good many of those visas. People must have a degree of anxiety about what their future is at the expiration of those visas.
Yes, there's a lot of anxiety and just uncertainty about the future. One thing that I realized during my recent trip to Ukraine is that every single day is a fight for survival. There is no ability to plan the next day. You don't know whether you will have a power cut. You don't know whether you will have a Russian missile or bomb fly over your head. And the Ukrainians that escaped that environment to come to a safe haven in Australia, they escaped that uncertainty. And Australia gave them not only a home, but also certainty that their future is safe. Now we're coming to a point where these displaced Ukrainians don't know if they will have to go back home. Some of them don't have a home to go back to. They don't know whether they will be deported, which is a real fear in our community, that once the visa finishes, what will happen? 70% are women and children. Children will have to be uprooted again. They're already experiencing significant psychological trauma. So for children to be uprooted from school where they've just settled in and not knowing where to go or what to do, it's definitely causing a lot of mental health issues. So
I know that you've indicated that you have a good communication back and forth with Minister Giles' office, and I note that for the record. But one thing the government could do right now for the Ukrainian community is make a very clear statement that nobody will be deported and that there will be an ongoing assurance of residence in Australia. And then that would include a long-term commitment to residence for work, Medicare, education, social security. If the government made that as a policy announcement and then worked with you to deliver the right package, how would the Ukrainian community receive that if there was a clear statement?
Well, right now we as community leaders have been reassuring our community members that that no one is going to be deported, that the Australian government will support them, but it's coming from community. Yep. If that message came from government, which Minister Giles has been very supportive in all of our communications, yep, I think that would go a long way in alleviating some of the short-term concern.
And with that, perhaps a commitment to some kind of long-term visa rather than rolling bridging visas, which creates uncertainty for education and work.
That's right, because if it's just rolling and just kicking the can down the road. So if we have some sort of indication to pathways to permanent residency, that would be ideal.
Yeah, and we could say more, but I note the time and I note the Chair's polite indications that I should stop.
Thank you very much, Senator Shoebridge. Senators, of course, can put questions on notice to the witness, and the committee has agreed that responses to those questions on notice should be provided by close of business Monday, the 22nd of July, 2024. Thank you, Ms. Argyrou, for coming along. For coming along today and for your testimony. The committee really appreciates that, and that concludes today's hearing. Thank you to the witness for appearing and to Broadcasting and Hansard for their assistance, and the committee stands adjourned.
Thank you, Senator.